Hello, everybody. Good morning from Dhaka, Bangladesh. Good evening, afternoon if you're in a different time zone. I doubt we'll have people in the night, so I won't say good night. Um, my name is Salimul Haq. I'm the director of the International Center for Climate Change and Development, and we are the hosts of this Gobeshona conference. I'm going to say a few words about the Gobeshona conference itself, its evolution, and where we are now, and what's going to happen in the 7-day long conference. And then I'm going to explain what we hope to do in this opening session, where you will see we have a number of very eminent Bangladeshi leaders in the issue of locally led adaptation, and we'll hear their stories. So let me start with a little bit of history. Gobeshona, for those of you who don't know what Gobeshona means, is a Bangla word for research, and it is the name we chose for developing a platform of researchers working on climate change in Bangladesh almost a decade ago. We brought together all the researchers working on different aspects of climate change together with people who are also practicing. So it's a mix of researchers and practitioners. And over the years, we now have well over 50 research institutes and universities and NGOs as partners in Bangladesh. And we used to do a big annual conference, in-person conference over 4 or 5 days at my university, the Independent University of Bangladesh, for many years. And then because of COVID, we were not able to do the in-person conference from a couple of years ago. So in 2021, we decided to switch from in-person to online. And because we were online, we were able to reach out to many of our friends around the world and invited them to host online sessions. And we got such an overwhelming response that we ended up running the conference 24 hours a day for 7 days. And my team are now all in a hotel. We booked a hotel, we're staying there, and we are running this session. And this is the first session of this conference. But what we have been able to do is to get nearly 100 sessions hosted by different groups around the world, we do it in 8-hour chunks, 8 hours starting with the Asia Pacific time zone, 8 hours for the Africa, Europe time zones, and then 8 hours for the Americas, South, Central, and North time zones. And then we go around the world again. And we did that again last year, the second time. And it was so successful that we have now decided not to go back to the old in-person format. We're going to stay online and stay global. And this is the third time we're doing it. Okay? So this is our third annual global Gobeshona conference. And the theme has always been locally led adaptation and resilience. But we want to progress that theme. We started with it 2 years ago. We went forward with it last year, got many more people because locally led adaptation is happening everywhere in the United States, in Canada, in Japan, in Australia. Everybody's doing it. So this is a platform where people can share what they're doing. And this year, we're going to elevate our ambition a little bit and ask all our participants and session hosts to share experience on whether or not they are applying the 8 principles of locally led adaptation. Locally led adaptation has gone through quite a evolution in thinking and in planning, and we have developed collectively across the community of practice globally 8 principles. Now, not everybody knows about those principles. Those who do know it, not everybody is applying all of them, but some are. And we want to learn from them, the experience of applying principles, which ones work, which ones don't work, which ones you find difficult, which ones you find easy. And we hope to go up a learning curve. And every year, that will be our theme. What is the experience so far? And how do we build on the experience that we have? And that brings me to this session for today, the opening session from Dhaka. So given that we are no longer a Bangladesh-based conference and now a global conference, I decided that we will start the session with the story of Bangladesh for the global audience. And for those of you who work in locally led adaptation, I'm sure I don't have to tell you that Bangladesh has been doing this for a long time. and we have a lot of experience in doing it. I have invited a number of leaders, a small number. There are many more, but I've selected a few people that I feel have done a great deal and can share their experience with us. I will invite each of them by turn to tell us their experience, and then a little bit about lessons that they have learned from their sector of work. They all have different sectors in which they have done their work. I will ask them to share that experience, and then at the end, I will ask each of them to give us some advice on where do we go from here? How do we take the issue of locally led adaptation to the next level globally, not just in Bangladesh? We're doing what we can in Bangladesh, but at the global level as well. So, as I said, for the presenters who are with us, the audience is a global audience. And what I want us to achieve in this session is to give this global audience a sense of how Bangladesh did what it did and where Bangladesh is going next in terms of locally led adaptation. So I'll introduce each of the speakers as I invite them to speak. Can I ask everybody to turn the cameras on so we can have a screenshot of everybody?
I already turned my camera on, but I don't know what
It
happened. I'm
did.
so sorry.
Don't worry. Yeah, there
Yes,
you are. We've
now
got
you're
you.
good.
Thank you. Well done.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm going to start with you, Hasin. Hasin Jahan is the leader, the head of WaterAid Bangladesh. She is a civil engineer herself, and she's been working in the water sector for many, many years in Bangladesh. She's one of our leading wash experts and protagonist and action-oriented person. WaterAid is one of the biggest water sector global NGOs, but in Bangladesh also a very prominent NGO. So Hasin, let me start with inviting you to share a little bit about your personal journey and experience, particularly working with the vulnerable communities. This is the focus of our experience sharing. What have you done, and what have you learned from what have you done? Hasin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. As all of you know, that the core of LLA is empowering women and addressing the structural inequities. So my discussion will be limited to this first, and then the other principles briefly. Since I'm working in the development sector for the last 2 decades, over 2 decades, and most of my work is related to community engagement from the very beginning as a part of my work. So at the very early stage, maybe 15 years back or so, when we start working in the communities, um, we actually focused on participatory rural appraisal. You all know about PRA, and where we use different tools, but mostly inclined to determine the wealth ranking or well-being ranking for situation analysis of a particular area regarding water, sanitation, hygiene, mostly because to promote cross subsidies among rich and poor, as well as to ensure or protect the voice of the poorer section or marginalized sections within the community. So that was our start of our journey. And as I worked in different development organizations, this was more or less the same for each of them. But back in 2010, around that time, WaterAid for the first time introduced its climate resilient program, and I was the director programs at that time, and I took the lead in developing and designing the project, and also taking it to the community level. And at that time, I faced the biggest challenge because the whole concept of climate change and so on are very much kind of new to us at that time. So the biggest challenge that I faced, that what to tell to community, how we make the community understand what climate change means to them. So we work hard on that, and with help of many in the sector at that time, we developed simple manual to make them understand, discuss, uh, to ignite the discussion and relate their day-to-day life with climate change initiatives. And we developed an approach called PWVA, participatory ward vulnerability assessment. Ward is the lowest tier in government administration, which is linked to the union level, which is the lowest administrative tier for the government in Bangladesh. So there are 9 wards under one union, and we went with I mean, we developed the approach in a such way that one word will represent one plan, and that plan will be inclusive of everything, not only water, sanitation, and hygiene. If they need a road construction, if they want, they need cyclone shelter or whatever, every single thing will come under that word vulnerable assessment, and the ward member will lead that together with the community, and that will go to the union parishad for their annual planning. And union parishad chairperson is ideally collect all these 9 and do their one plan for the union level. So this is kind of a start of our journey in terms of LLA, and later on we actually try to evaluate how our work is complying with LLA principles, and I have seen that more or less it fits in all the principles. There are some more to do to kind of comply the principles in a better way, in a more compliant way, but we are still working on that, especially where we will be needing the support of externals to make it happen. So we are on the journey, and hope these journeys will be documented and shared with all in due way. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Haseen. I know that you're in the field right now and have bandwidth struggles, so we were not able to see you live on camera, but we heard you all right. Before I let you go, though, I know you have to leave. Let me ask you a follow-up question. Given that WaterAid is a global institution working across the world, and you are the head of the Bangladesh unit, to what extent have you been able to share your experiences from Bangladesh with colleagues in other countries, particularly, let's say, in Africa? Is there a way that you've been able to do that successfully? And if so, we'd love to hear your story.
Um, we shared lot of stories in a piecemeal basis. I mean, like case stories. We have Since we are present in 28 countries all over the globe, including African countries. So we had our mechanism to share those case stories, and also we worked with ECAD and IIED to share some stories. But what I feel personally, that we should be compile those story, or we will prepare some more, which will be looking at or converted in the lens of LLA, so that people also understand how the relationship with that story goes with LLA. And this is not applicable for our country. I believe this is also applicable for other organizations who are working here, especially in Bangladesh, because we are doing so much of good work, but we often forget to document it properly. And even we document it properly, we sometimes do not disseminate. We think we should look forward to do so. Thank you.
Excellent, excellent, Haseen. We will definitely follow up with you afterwards. I know you have to leave, so feel free to drop out if you wish to do so. But do stay as long as you can.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Haseen. Well
Thank you
done.
so much.
So let me move to our next guest, who also will have to leave at some point. So I'll invite her to speak next. So our next guest is Runa Khan, who is the head of a very well-known NGO in Bangladesh called Friendship. which started by doing floating hospitals. It's famous for its floating hospitals. They go all over the country providing health services to people who never get to see a hospital. They live on the islands in the middle of the rivers and in the coastal zone. And then she's branched out into many other things. So let me invite Runa to tell us her story of how she started working with the most vulnerable people, and what are the lessons that you have learned in doing that personally.
Thank you very much, and Salim Bhai, and I'm really happy to be here because I like this connection of local and global, which you have really kind of made an example of. So we are very happy to be part of this because I think one of the deep reason is Bangladesh is really like an academic lab. The whole country is a laboratory of people who are working not only in climate but in so many other aspects, be it even for poverty alleviation or with children with disabilities or whatever. We have small organizations which are really doing very intense work, and to provide them this global platform and linking it to climate, because honestly, this is what it is. My journey started, with going into areas where there was no one else, inaccessible, unaddressed. And I was so surprised in a country with 30, 40,000 NGOs, there were these areas which had not been addressed. People didn't even know, a white skin, and they would come to the doctors and touch their skin. So this was what I experienced myself. And my journey started, by listening to local voices and local stories. So LLA, locally led adaptation. Now, when you are working with the most remote communities, when you're working with communities bottom upwards, it is all LLA. There is nothing you can do which is not an LLA. And LLA needs to be part of the mainstream, actually, because in our countries, which is all impacted by climate, some areas more so than others, it is the way of life and the way of actually implementing projects. So, I designed projects not by trying to design any project, but just by going to the community and listening to them, listening to and feeling the inequities, which was existing between these remote areas and even the villages which were across the river. And I knew that, all these terms of innovation, social entrepreneurship, all these actually mean nothing, because if there is only one meaning, and that is impactful meaning. Are the people being impacted by whatever intervention you're giving to them? Is this impact sustainable? And how does sustainability come? Sustainability comes if people internalize. And why do people internalize? People internalize because they need. And you have put the right thing at the right time, in the right amount, in the right way, they internalize. And this is how we started. There were no statistics available for these regions that we were working on. And today I realize that 100% of our core work for 20 years has been with climate migrants. And the geography, socioeconomic, political system needed to be brought to their awareness. They knew how to deal with it, but they also needed to deal with the political ecosystem when they migrated. So, of course, disease burden, to reduce that was the first need that needed to be addressed. Because when you are suffering, there is no other development intervention which anybody will take into account, or even food becomes secondary. So therefore, I started with health, building a modality which is truly mobile for migrant communities. For example, I realized that the extended immunization programs, following up a patient for cervical cancer, it was really impossible because people were migrating. Therefore, we put in an mHealth modality, which is not center-based, but individual-based, which is one of, it's quite unique because it's like that. And we could track an EPI child who has done 2 injections and not the third. So we could track the children. And this is now, of course, in Uganda, Slovakia, we have scaled it up and taken it there. And it's working very, very well. And similarly, our education program, I couldn't follow any norms. So it comes into the bracket of innovation, but I don't even take this term innovation into account because I needed the children to learn and learn well and be able to use that learning in their life. So how does one do that? So teachers, but people from the community we made into teachers, infrastructures were those which were mobile, considering the local needs with the local and by the local, you know. So even today, we have like about 5,000 people in the organization, but 60% are those that we have trained locally from communities which they follow around as the communities move around, right from going into, you know, we have done so many things like CIDRR, community initiated disaster risk reductions, you know, plinths which were made by the people but would not be broken. These are flood shelters, training the communities for impact. One flood volunteer took built a raft of banana plants, which we actually plant a lot on these islands, knew how to make a raft and saved 45 women and children and got the UN Women Award for that, you know, right from the field. So when each person has this ability and capacity and of understanding that they can do it, things synergize. And then these are the way of dealing with it in the north. In the south and coastal areas, it was very, very different. The whole concept of the first need besides health was water. So we had to put up a row of desalination water plants, you know, which could be in a business modality. Why so much of need? Because this woman comes up with a health issue, 3 miscarriages at 19 years old, ostracized from society. Our satellite clinics identifies, goes to our hospital. The hospital then realizes it could be drinking water, and we gave free drinking water whole pregnancy to this woman. 4th baby, nice healthy boy. You know, continuously you're doing this. Then why are we doing all this? A country which is 5 meters above the sea level with one cyclone or one storm, one, you know, tidal wave, you are losing so much. It's only 5 meters above the sea level. So you have the first line of defense, the green defense, which is the mangroves, have been pushed back and back, south and south and south towards the sea. And unless you do that, the first line of protection is gone, because the first line cannot protect the second line, which are the embankments, often hand-built by the communities. Third line, the agriculture. 4th line, the villages. The whole chain of disasters strike right from breaking the embankments up to the villages. So you needed to build this chain before thinking of doing plantation. So it's protection, it's more than that. And the learnings that we've had, you know, I certainly agree with our speaker before, you know, because we need documentation. You know, so many of us are working organically, and organic work, there is a limitation to the sharing. And certainly we are going into this, and now we are making an academy, a friendship academy, which is based out of Luxembourg. We are working with 1 or 2 universities, French universities, for sharing and documentation of our work to be taught as classes nationally and internationally. And I think this is the step of how we can share our work globally.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, Runa. Let me just give a follow-up question for you as well, because I know that you have worked at the global level considerably as well. So what do you think are ways in which the experiences that we have in Bangladesh from different sectors can be, you've mentioned documentation and the need to do better documentation, but what are other ways in which you feel that our learning experiences can be shared with a much wider global audience, because you've done that?
You know, now I'm going to say something which is not really in the norm, and it might not be liked by many organizations.
Don't worry. You feel free.
But thank you. You know how I am, so I will not stop. You know, I find this very colonialistic way, and it is very old-fashioned, of going and setting up friendship all over the world. I think it's a very old-fashioned way of working and very colonialistic. I mean, every country has got people who are very, very capable of doing the work themselves, feeling the responsibility of that work, having the heart to ensure that they follow up, and because it's their people and their friends and their family and their country. And I think this ability of the oneness is extremely important. Therefore, I do not really believe, and not at all believe, in going Friendship International in a sense of taking this all over the world. And there have been so many things from Kenya. Mr. Obama's sister, has taken our whole modality, and she's talking about it all over the world for our, the sustainable economic development work that we do. And she's using it in her area in Kenya with tweaking. And we have gone there, they have come here, and we have built it together for her. And I go there. So, and I think what we need to do is to open up Bangladesh as an academic lab to the world. I mean, this has to be done. People will come and take what they feel they need and not what we think they need, know? And I think this sharing has to be done with respect. And I think it will happen. Everybody wants to learn. And I think this will happen naturally.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Aruna, for sharing that experience. In fact, I'll just add a little point here that I was going to make at the end, but I'll make it now. One of the experiences we have in locally led adaptation in terms of sharing knowledge is, as you've just said, what we call peer-to-peer learning, not going and telling people what to do, but inviting them to come and see what we are doing. And then they ask questions, they find out, they'll say some things we can do, some things we can't do. It's their decision as to what they can take back with them. And that's something that we would like to pursue more systematically. We're doing it in an ad hoc way, but let us do it in a much more systematic way going forward.
I want to add, because one little point that, we need to go beyond an organization and look at the world in a far more holistic way. Poverty, climate change in a far more holistic way. An organization will always remain one organization, whatever the impact, whatever you can share, whatever you can do. It's one organization. It's not enough. You need the world to learn, and
so I think this panel is a good reflection of organizational leaders who have also collaborated over time. So, I mean, that's my takeaway, and what I try to say about Bangladesh is that there are many different activities going on with different leaders and organizations, all doing good things, but we're also joining forces and adding value to each other.
I think it refers to a policy statement that collective actions or collective initiatives work, I think, better. As Runa referred to, and we believe in that. I think we need collective initiatives, but it may not be we are very much confined with a particular theory or concept.
Well, we all work for organizations. We have organizational prerogatives, but we need to think beyond them. And I think we do that. It's the question of how do we do it more effectively than we do at the moment. At the moment, it's somewhat ad hoc, a bit here, a bit there. Let us see if we can add value. So let me now move on to, thank you very much, Runa. And again, I know you may have to leave, so please feel free to drop out whenever you need to. I'm going to move on to Dilruba. Dilruba Haider, who works for UN Women and is one of our leaders in working with grassroots women's groups. And as we all know, women play a very, very key role in the principles of locally led adaptation, in practicing locally led adaptation, in becoming the leaders, the local leaders in the word locally led adaptation. The second L is the key word in the phrase LLA. It's led by people, and particularly by women. And she has a tremendous amount of experience in this field. So Dilruba, let me ask you to share your experience of working at the grassroots and particularly working with women at the grassroots. Dilruba.
Thank you very much, Salim Bhai, and big congratulations to ICAD for this third conference online, which you have already said is a successful venture and able to connect so many people around the globe. So congratulations for that. I think I must start with how I came to believe actually in the power of women's engagement and women's leadership in adaptation. I started my career with DFID, which is now called FCDO, and I started working on disaster management ever since. Like it was like 30 years ago. But in DFID, I manage a lot of cyclones, floods. Provided support to NGOs, but not really to women's NGOs. It was basically the big national NGOs or Oxfam, CARE, BRAC, but Ganashastra Kendra, but not necessarily women's CSOs. Women's organizations have always been traditionally engaged into gender-based violence, women's economic empowerment sort of issues, not necessarily on disaster management and climate change. But then from disaster management, then I moved to disaster risk reduction, and I was sort of instrumental in designing the comprehensive disaster management program of the country from my DFID days, and we moved into disaster risk reduction work. And there, during that program development, it was, I think, I could probably take credit of putting in this component of local disaster risk reduction fund. So the idea was that these local organizations, including local government, they should be able to have some, funding available to take on risk reduction programs within their own small community. But then, because it was a government program, it somehow didn't fly that much. And then from at that point, I was already in UNDP. And then from there, I gradually started to see the depth of knowledge and the power of women's organizations and women themselves. I have to tell a story of a project that we did right after SIDA in Bagherhat, Shatkhira area. So this was World Bank, who was doing a cyclone recovery program after SIDA. And our role was to develop the women's, not just women, women and men, but mostly focusing on women. So community-based organizations who would be able to manage the interventions after the project is over. And I saw how women, especially women, how they were so engaged and so dedicated and ready to put in their time, taking away from their day-to-day care burden, domestic work, and engage into community causes. So, and another project which was supported by SDC was developing, building cyclone shelters. And I saw how women, when brought together, we formed women's groups, and the women were so dedicated, and we taught them about, gave them orientation about the specifications of cyclone shelters, how the cyclone shelters should be built, how it should be designed, what kind of materials should be used, the thickness of the rod and all that. And you would be, I was surprised myself, the way they held the contractors, the engineers accountable. And there were instances when they actually made the contractor take back the lot of steel that was brought to build the cyclone shelters. So the people's power is actually, all we needed was to give them some information, give them some briefing, get them together, and they were doing wonders. And that actually bolstered my trust and belief on local organizations, and especially women's organizations ever since I joined UN Women 8 years ago. And we started working with women CSOs, and they are, phenomenal. Just I remember in 2019 when there was a flood, we are working with some 60 women CSOs in different parts of the country, developing their capacity as champions of climate change and disaster risk reduction causes. And in 2019, when there was a flood, we were doing the flood response from UN Women. And as usual, the local influential people, the local elites and leaders, they were trying to take, use the beneficiary list for their own, groups and all that. But these women CSOs, they went from door to door. We gave them the list that we got from the local level. They went from door to door and selected the actual women who were deserving ones. And I mean, there were a lot of, protest from the local leaders, but they had good reputation in the area. People knew that these are really good women who are trying to do good for the community. And therefore, the local administration, they supported the women's groups. And we could manage to support really the deserving women. So, and the story just goes on and on. I also have to tell you the story of a girl that we supported in Mongla. I keep on telling this story to everybody. Her name is Mahira, and she is a lady, a woman living in the Sundarbans areas, in the very periphery of the Sundarbans. And she has been, poorest of the poor. She and her husband used to go to collect gulpata and, all these small bits and pieces of woods from Sundarbans and sell in the market. And they were, hardly living, making their living. And then when we went into that area, we had a climate change and gender program implemented by BRAC at that time. I think Rabbani Bhai was also part of that program. And this lady, she got some funding for livelihoods pro initiatives. And we only gave them a little bit of money to set up a grocery shop in front of our household. It was a very small one. And after a year, when I went to for field visit to see how things are been going on, and I didn't find Mahira at her home. I found her in a local market with a big shop. She set up a big shop on her own, got the money from the business she started, took a bit of money from her husband's in-laws or something. And she now runs a big shop in the local market, selling from pencil to kerosene and, petrol and everything. And she runs this shop from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And the husband, he takes care of their two sons. Mm-hmm. I mean, and the confidence she has. So this story tells me and everybody else that all you need is to give a tiny bit of support, mm-hmm. give them a little bit of knowledge about the climate, about how they can save themselves, about how they can protect their own families, how can they engage into the community consultation and decision making, and you have wonders. Mm-hmm. And this is just not one Mahira. I mean, I have been working in this field for years now, almost 30 years. And this is the story everywhere.
It is.
The women are really the torch bearers. I mean, think about the microcredit, think about the social forestry, think about the ORS, everything. It's been the success story of the women. So even for locally led adaptation, it has to be the women who would lead the way.
Absolutely.
Stop there. Thank you.
Absolutely. Wonderful, Dilruba. Let me ask you a quick follow-up question. Now that you work in a UN agency, UN Women, to what extent do you feel that the Bangladeshi experience, percolates into the UN system as a whole. You are part of the UN system. You work in the Bangladesh office of UN Women. UN Women is a global organization. It's part of the UN system. What is your experience of not being told by them what to do, but you telling them what to do?
Yes. No, honestly speaking, UN Women is not very much into climate change for that matter. We are into DRR, disaster risk reduction, and humanitarian action. But honestly speaking, Bangladesh is leading the climate change discourse within the UN Women system. And they do value, UN Women globally does value the Bangladesh's leadership in climate change adaptation and locally led adaptation for that matter very recently. So we do share all the lessons that we have, not just of UN Women, but also from other organizations. And we are being heard by UN Women. So that's just UN Women, but also I think we are, invited to various international and regional fora to talk about the stories of women, how women are leading. So we always keep on saying that it has to be women's leadership. Mm-hmm. It has to be the three things I keep on saying: women's leadership. We need disaggregated data to ensure to make it a point to the policymakers, because the policymakers only understand figures, and we need gender analysis, and definitely we need women's resilience building through livelihoods. And I think, the globally also the UN Women say this.
Very good, very good. Good to know. Thank you. So now let me move on to our next guest. Farah Kabir, who is the head of ActionAid Bangladesh and has a huge experience working. In particular, I admire Farah for her ability to connect the local to the national to the global. She's been doing this for many, many years within her own organization, ActionAid. She's one of the global leaders. She's a global leader in disaster risk reduction and in climate change. And she works very much on the ground with her colleagues in Bangladesh as well, and also shares this knowledge with other ActionAid partners around the world. So Farah, tell us a little bit about your own experiences. I know you can talk for hours about it, so give us a little snapshot of your own experience. Farah, over to you.
Thank you, Salim Bhai, and hello to everyone. My journey, I'm a public policy person, and I spent in my previous life a good amount of time working on women's political empowerment, women's rights, and a feminist principle. So that's where my focus was. And but I came in contact with issues of climate change, I think from 2004 or 5 when I was in the UK. And there, that time, it was so much about conservation. And even in the UK, because I was leading the British Council program on gender governance, participatory democracy. So it was interesting that someone from the South was working with the parliamentarians in the UK, with the policymakers and the community. And the focus at that time was about conservation. And even then, I felt that you're talking about conservation. Where I come from, we recycle everything. If you buy a bottle, it ends up becoming, it changes, metamorphoses into different things at different point in time. Nothing is wasted. If it's the cloth, then it ends up being a quilt. So, that's the journey. But then at that time in 2007, I was interested to come back to Bangladesh, and ActionAid reached out to me. So I joined in June 2007. And the following 6 months were really my awakening, realization, learning moment. Because yes, ActionAid was always working with the community. And in fact, it came to Bangladesh in 1983 as a response to the Bhola cyclone Sidor. So our presence, ActionAid's presence, are in all the coastal areas, whether it is about building roads or building schools, organizing communities, livelihood, fisher folk, women, farmers. So that was very strong. But all the interventions will seem to be becoming meaningless, ineffective because of the multiple disasters. And just in 6 months that I was with ActionAid, in the first 6 months, I had to deal with multiple disasters, waterlogging, floods, and then Cyclone Sidor was actually a moment where it shocked me into the thinking that we have to prioritize climate change. And in 2008 onwards, it became one of the priority areas for ActionAid Bangladesh. And we managed to influence the federation. ActionAid is a federation, 47 countries. But what I learned was actually by hands-on working with the community. Suppose CEDAW happens, and then there's the COP conference, and we were the first to take a community participant to speak for herself. And you were there, the World Bank people were there, and Akhtar Banu, who came from Pabna Bera, an island. This was her first moment out of Pabna Bera to Dhaka, and then from Dhaka to Bali. This was her first passport. But she was very, people often say that the community does not understand climate change. Maybe they don't have the phraseology, terminology, or the right labels. But she was there and she asked in a panel, you're talking about you're going to look at the I's and the T's and you're going to do this in the next 20 years. But when I go to bed and then I wake up next morning, a part of my house is gone because of river erosion. I have to move again, and I've already moved 20. So that those moments stay with me. And I think we went in with whatever understanding we had to work with the community. So in different islands of the coastal areas around the Sundarbans, and the issues were about, first of all, livelihood. So fisher folk, farmers, how do we do alternative livelihood? What are the ways to sustain ourselves? So and we did not come up with a solution from the north or the concept that one size fit all. We have that advantage. And that's why I like working with ActionAid, is that we stand with the poor, by the poor, and listen. So the alternative, Gobeshona was a process where the women, the community mapped what resources they had, what they had lost, and what skills they had. So this is 2008 when I'm learning about, you have to do mapping and analysis of resources and then finding the alternatives. And they were very much able to do that. And they came up with suggestions like, we need a bunker. And I said, I would want a bunker of all the things. You want seed, you want house. They said, no, the water after the floods will recede, after the cyclone will recede. But if we have a bunker underground, then we can save our papers, we can store our seeds, we can store water and XYZ. So they already had solutions. And it was very interesting that once I started working, and given that ActionAid does not have a project approach, because we do child sponsorship and we work in a community, anything from 10, 12 years, and then follow up. So in this whole area, we were fortunate to do a lot of innovation around locally led adaptation, whether it was about raising the plinth, whether it was about saving the seeds, or whether it was about building shelters. And we came up with shelter designs that were community friendly. When we talked about moving the women and the community to the shelter, they would not move unless there was a space to keep the animal, the kettles, because they say that the disaster will finish, the disaster will end, but then our lives have to continue. And I've seen a woman with a child under one arm and a goat on the other arm. This is not a story, this is real, And so we designed the shelters. We took a risk and designed the individual shelters, collective shelters, and we then took it to the house building, regulatory bodies, that these are the guidelines you need. This is the guidelines you need for shelter. And from adaptation, the number of times they were moving, the coastal areas were planting different crops and so on, but the climate change was causing the disasters again and again. So it became critical that I take this to national and global level. And we all collectively pushed at the national level. If you remember, you were working with IIED, I presented at IIED at different places, that if I have challenged donors, development partners, that you talk about development, but you don't look at the intersectionality of it. You don't take into cognizance the whole life cycle of it. I am X country, so I want to do education. I'm Y country, I like to help you with health. I am Z country, I want to do all the infrastructure. But the impact is multiple, and it's into the whole life cycle.
Correct.
And within, so this learning has then led us to work with the community, come up with local solutions, come up with innovations, but it needed to move on to different stages, and then taking it at the global level, influencing at COP, asking for the emphasis on women, on feminist leadership, because ActionAid's signature is women-led emergency. There was no confusion across ActionAid that it's the first responders. It's they who deal with the community, with their family, and they have some innate qualities. It's instinct. Now we talk a lot about emotional intelligence. You have leadership programs telling you how to work on emotional intelligence, but here are hands-on experiences. Already. And we drew from there. So my journey has been that if you give the platform, they know what they want and how they want. If you can convince our influencers, the policymakers and decisions with stories, evidence, and you're not just coming with the theory only, but you're coming with solutions, then you see the changes happen. Sorry, excellent. That's the intercom. Yeah, so I'll stop there.
Excellent, excellent. Let me just ask a quick follow-up question for you as well, because as I said, I've been going to the COPs. I'm one of the few people who's been to all 27 of these the annual events called COPs. And I've noticed that you are one of the first national level development practitioners. And you mentioned this example when you took the lady from Bangladesh from the grassroots to the COP in Bali, who has been doing this. You have engaged. Not that many have done. More and more are doing it over time. But initially, you were one of the first to do this. So a quick reflection on how you think you might have been able to influence the COP decision-making process as a civil society, person in that process. You have engaged. What kind of reflection do you have in terms of what you were able to do and what you might want to do in future?
Thank you for that question. When I started going at the national level, our delegations were not very clear also. And I hope anyone from the government do not take any offense. It's not personal. But in COPs from 2007 onwards, I was the de facto representative joining as part of the government's delegation, joining in many of these COP negotiations. And I also had to learn, because negotiations can be pretty dry and boring. And to be able to understand the whole language and the process. But because of the passion and the commitment, I was able to follow it. So I became by de facto joining the gender COP, the people community level or a local led, the different stakeholder constituencies. So when you talk about influencing, I think I'm influenced by presenting the Bangladesh experience there. Number one. Number two, I work very closely by committing my time and knowledge to the national policymakers. And we were able to come up with, whether we talk about the climate strategy, whether we talk about the trust fund and the national adaptation fund, these processes where we all contributed. It's not one individual, but because we were able to bring that at the COP level, Doha COP was where it was meant to be a gender related COP. There was no participation from the government because it had limited number of people. So I worked very closely with individuals like Mary Robinson or other women leaders, and to be able to put Bangladesh on that stage repeatedly at every COP. I think that may have been a contribution there.
Excellent.
And then coming back and also providing the stories, providing the evidence, because it's not enough just to say that I want a feminist perspective, I want equal right for women, or I think women in emergency is the way to go. You had to demonstrate. And that has influenced a lot of other organizations there. And that is probably why often one is called to speak about the experiences from the ground, share the experiences of the community's women leadership. And we developed, of course, models, resilience model, indicators. So Sendai, when the Sendai conference and before the signing up, again, we took a woman leader from Bangladesh and she presented her perspective. And, so along with Action Aid, these individuals help to shape the policies and the contributions.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to now move on to our next speaker. And I hope the audience has noticed that we have a majority of women speakers on this panel, and that I'm giving the ladies the first opportunity to speak, and the men will come later. I hope they don't mind. So my next guest is Samia Salim, who is a professor at the at the ULAB, the Liberal Arts Bangladesh University. And she is actually an expert in biodiversity and conservation. And she's been working at the grassroots level in Bangladesh for many years as well as a conservationist and a biologist. So Samia, let's hear from you your own personal experiences, particularly working at the grassroots level in Bangladesh, and how that has shaped your own thinking, your own research going forward. Samia.
Thank you, Salim bhai, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel with such esteemed panelists. It's a bit intimidating to follow from such amazing women leaders who actually some are my mentors and whose work has been shaping the work that I do now. But as you said, I will focus on my journey and what I've been doing here. So first and foremost, my beginning is I'm an academic, and a lot of my work in the 7 years that I've been working in Bangladesh at the grassroots has been shaped by my research, which is on social ecological systems. And by that, I mean, I've always seen the importance of needing to take a very systems approach in addressing such societal challenges around environmental degradation, climate change, and how to bring about sustainable development. So my, my journey on work on resilience and adaptation has been very much shaped by trying to understand how do we understand a system where we have to understand people's needs. We have to look after our natural resources, because a lot of the problems that we are facing to this challenge today is because we have been not been conserving and degrading the natural resources which we are dependent on. And the fact that our actions disproportionately impact certain communities that are far more vulnerable to climate change because of our actions globally and in other places. So my work, I moved to Bangladesh after completing my PhD. I'm a marine social scientist. So as soon as I moved here, my work has been in coastal communities in Shatkhira in Sundarbans area, where again the needs for conservation as well as adaptation. So I started just wanted to share a few observations from this work that I've been doing. Is the fact that when I started the work on adaptation, I first saw that there's already so much going on in Bangladesh already. As you said and others have said, Bangladesh really is a leader in showing success stories on adaptation. So what I did was not try to reinvent the wheel, and what I did was picked on some long-term projects that others, Bangladesh, again, the different NGOs, INGOs have been working in this space on climate adaptation. So I used the ecosystem-based adaptation lens to see which ones what interventions work that is, beneficial for people and biodiversity. And some key things through this line of work, which then led to the work on LLA that I'm now working on, that I'm working in other areas, is the fact that, as others have mentioned, this role of natural resource and governance of natural resource, which involves decision making. And on all the projects that I studied in my research, this decision making on who makes the decision, how they're made, what role do local people have in it, has always been minimal. It has definitely improved over the years, but that's always been a striking thing. It's always been project based. It's these donor funded 2-year, 3-year, at most 5 years, and they come in and you give give certain resources, certain capital, but never really engage in building that capacity of the local community, and not just local community as in the people, but also institutions at the grassroots level. So there's always been a gap in that. And I think although we have come a long way in doing that and building the capacity, there's still so much more to be done, which again feeds into, that's really embedded in explicitly in LLA principles. How do you, bring decision making at the lowest tier? But the other two areas that I wanted to address on which is also in LLA, is flexible and patient funding and flexible programming, right? So my work, I've been working with small scale fishers groups. I've been working with women in aquaculture. We've been, working with in Monpura, in Gabura. And here again, what I'm trying to do is look at how what we know about what works. How do you embed that in longer term programs at the ground level where, local people and local institutions, grassroots, gets to make those decisions? My work has been very transdisciplinary. My interest has always been, academics coming in, researching, finding out, publishing. Yay, that's great, but that doesn't mean anything. And more, we need to move away from that space where publishing as academics is your, highest tier of success. We have to be transdisciplinary. We have to work with other stakeholders. And that's really been my personal journey, which is what brought me to where I am right now. I'm working as an advisor to another organization, started the foundation, and helping to design their climate change program. And that's now where I'm trying to, all that, from my learning, and given that we have these excellent 8 principles of LLA, as well as, I know we're not talking about nature-based solutions here, but that's, again, is one of the key things that I think. And through this program, me and my team are trying to design a program where you explicitly are following, and how to develop indicators to see how you, measure these, how are you actually following these principles? Right. And it's very easy to study it, much harder to do it. So, and alone I won't, which is great to learn from others, how they're doing it. And I think platforms like this where we discuss and we have dialogues on how each of us are doing it and what works, what doesn't, is really the way that we can really start embedding, not just talking, not just writing, but doing.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Samia. So I'm going to ask you a question slightly tangential. I know that you're a very successful teacher in the university, and you have inspired a lot of your younger students as well as your younger faculty members. Tell us a little bit about that experience. What have you learned from that, and what is your reflection on the younger generation of Bangladeshis who are studying these issues?
Thank you for that question, because I think that's, with all the challenges and difficulties and sometimes, bureaucratic, hopeless situations, they really are, it's not a cliche to say they're the future generation. They really are the ones who are, saying no to the, to the BS and calling out, what needs to be done and get on and do it. And I think, not LLA per se, but building their capacity and giving them that space to come up with solutions, to, call out, what needs to change, those systematic, structural inequity and inequality. They're the ones who are going to really help, because we're having to relearn, our older generation having to relearn some of these, but that's already part of, and that's really what I think is so important in education, to besides the science, to give them that voice to bring their knowledge and their ideas, into this pedagogy of, education and science as well. So yes.
Excellent. Great. Thank you.
Invest in them.
Thank you very much, Samia. So I'm going to now shift to our fellow academics. So Samia, myself, and Hamidul are the three academics on this panel. But we're not just academics. We all practice what we teach, if you like. So Hamidul is also a professor at the United Independent University, and he has been doing work on sustainable development as a practitioner and now as a teacher for many, many years. He runs a conference on sustainable development every year, which I've had the privilege of participating in. And he's been a founder member of Gobeshona from the very beginning. So Hamidul, tell us a little bit about your personal journey and experience. You're on mute.
Thank you so much, Selim Bhai, and my respected colleagues, esteemed audience. Primarily, I was a social worker since 1979. And I had opportunity to work with very difficult areas of Bangladesh, like riverine areas, river chores, we call it Bangla, and also in coastal zones. So that was the big opportunity of learning from the local initiatives. And I learned the villagers, especially the women, are ever innovative scientists. They are always innovating new things to fight the new challenges just to make their livelihoods. And from theoretical perspectives, I learned the local people initiate projects to address their needs. And we, the development policymakers, we initiate projects to address our wants. So here is the gap between local initiatives and initiatives taken by the outsiders. And I learned it from my classroom. After having 20 years experience of working in the field, and from the theories or from literature, that how local initiatives are powerful than the outsiders, meaning the policymakers or politicians. And there I find the relationship between local power and the external power. And external power, they are convinced that the natural resources are unlimited, it will never end. And they initiated projects to exploit the natural resources up to the highest level, and which contributed in disasters. Here, disasters I want to mean the natural resources the local people live in, the damages and losses are generated there. And they request or ask or invite the local people to participate the outsiders initiated projects, where the local people are influenced to leave their own initiatives for their own livelihoods, rather joining the growth process. And growth process is the main reason of current bad situation in the overall social environment and natural environment. And here I find the relationship of debate, discussions, and looking for the solutions of sustainability. And sustainability may be in practice if we respect the local knowledge, local initiatives, and local needs and local potentials. And we may also support them to strengthen their initiatives in order to address their needs, maintaining the sustained management of natural resources. And in my work, I try to create or facilitate the sharing process of systematically documented knowledge, which I learned from Gobeshona. Selim Bhai has been always advocating leaders, especially in academic work, that please create new platforms or strengthen your own platforms to invite people to share their knowledge and to learn from others towards influencing the policy processes to narrow down the gaps between science policy practice. So as Salim Bhai mentioned, we organize every year International Conference on Sustainable Development. It is a platform where we try to facilitate the sharing of understanding the gaps and the consequences of the gaps, so that we systematically and with a commitment narrow down the gaps between local and external. And our students, they enjoy this platform very much, including the young scientists from many knowledge institutions, NGOs, government, different development departments and ministries. And there we learn, people really appreciate the processes of learning from each other and also understanding each other, so that they do not live away from each other, rather they come closer to each other. And one of the examples of our conference activities is we keep a common plenary session on Bangladesh Delta Plan, because that is our dominant guideline of national development. And this initiative is also supported by outsiders. So outsiders come with their own knowledge to convince us, but our initiative needs to also convince them that this is better than your solutions. So we are, in a win-win situation. And from my own empirical research, recently I learned that suddenly, just before the harvest of paddy, one storm came overnight. And the village women were the main, practitioners of agriculture, including managing the field. They were so shocked. And somehow, some paddy survived. But during harvesting, there was a week-long rainfall, which was totally unusual. So the losses were really unmanageable. And how to manage that? They have a practice of raising savings fund of their own. Though they have savings with the microcredit NGOs, but they cannot withdraw that fund because they are borrowers. So they manage their crisis that raised suddenly with rain and storm, and they survive and they could make their livelihoods. So this is the knowledge of managing uncertainty.
Very good.
And I think I learned from the villagers that climate change is nothing, but it is the influence of uncertainties. So that local innovation and development can protect them from the uncertainties. I think we can document all these practices, as Salim Bhai always suggested. Please come up with your own good practices, examples, or experience. But we also, some group has to play a role to document it systematically, and collectively we are very strong in knowledge base and we are very strong in policy influence, and also we can bring into the practice. Right. That all science policy practices that we are practicing in United International. Thank you.
Excellent, Hamidul. Thank you very much. Let me now move on to our next guest, Ghulam Rabbani, who is currently heading the Climate Bridge Fund, which is a very innovative fund managed by BRAC, but it's a funding mechanism that provides small grants to small NGOs, particularly in the urban sector. And he has been working in this field for many years. So Rabbani, tell us about your journey and your experience.
Yeah, thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for inviting, such a small group to share our learning, our journey on climate change adaptation, locally led adaptation, and resilience action to this conference. And I strongly believe that this small session where you have invited a mixed group, to share these experiences, and this this learning and the experience capturing is very much consistent with the conference theme, Gobeshona. So I appreciate that, to have a such innovative, interesting idea to bring these people and share their whole journey, to this conference. And interestingly, to talk about my journey, I find exactly, I have worked on this adaptation, resilience, action, since 2003, which is exactly 20 years. And, it is such a, fortunate journey that I had opportunity to work all of these fellow panelists. This is interesting, and starting from Samia, who worked with, Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, and, from research work to implementation, and with Farapa, at the climate negotiation session, and currently you are in the same cancer board, Hamid Bhai on, crossing boundaries project. So, this is a very lucky situation for me that, we worked together, since 2003. But I will, speak on two major elements, to share my journey. The first element is a vehicle that I used, to work on adaptation, and then, some of my critical lessons during last 2 decades. And you asked for, or 1 decade or so, but I will mention, 5 lessons is interesting. Well, the vehicle that I used, I want to include is, the research that I started with Bangladesh Center for Advanced Studies, and at some point advocacy and networking, capacity building, training, and policy and institution analysis. And then very recently, there has been a transformation from this research capacity building to an implementation type of involvement, which is, as you mentioned, the Climate Bridge Fund, and which is my current vehicle. So if I take some examples of my research, I remember that my second deliverable in my adaptation career was National Adaptation Programs of Action, the 6th group, policy and institutional group. And then, I had opportunity to work on second national communication, and my most important learning exercise was the developing the adaptation chapter for 3rd national communication. So that was very important, and Professor Salimul Haq was also there. You also guided us to develop this adaptation chapter. My dramatic and romantic, the climate career was when, sir, you engaged me as a CLAC fellow, capacity building, on climate change in LDC countries, and that engagement and writing some articles, co-authoring with you, and publishing in book chapter, publishing in journal, actually influenced my entire adaptation career, from local to national level to international knowledge system. So I really enjoyed that, and that was, an influencing point. And I want to say one more thing, at the beginning, I wanted to be a, mitigation expert, but I remember my colleague Muzahar Alam Babu, Atik sir, and finally Salim sir pushed me to work on adaptation. So I suddenly became, in the adaptation worker. So I'm not blaming. I'm saying that, I did my work on adaptation since the beginning. That because of this, these 3 people, including Salim sir, of course. And on implementation side, I see, as I mentioned, that the recent transformation that has been happened. Once we the difference that I see from the research career to an implementation career, once we conducted the research in the field to talk to communities about the problems, and we communicated the problems at the national level, at the policy level, and also at the international level. But when we do the implementation, we see we have to scan the problems to support those locally led adaptation solution. So the difference, once we explored about the problems, now I support the locally led solutions. So is the difference that I see from my research to implementation career, from BCS to BRAC. So that's the important part, in my journey I see. And I will not focus much on CBF, but I will just to communicate that currently we are working in 18 districts under the Climate Bridge Fund, through Climate Bridge, climate change window and emergency response window. Let me share now, some of the lessons in my adaptation journey of last 2 decades. Research on adaptation often focused on the current impacts and vulnerability. That is my experience from 2003 to almost 2015, 2016. But while future risks were not adequately explored and not being integrated adequately in the implementation process. That is my understanding. The first lesson, we often talked about the past experience or the current experience, but what might happen in the future, in next 2030, next 2040, 2050, and these are not explored adequately, and which means these are not being integrated in the implementation process. Then at some point of time, these adaptation actions might come as a maladaptation action. So which is my lesson, first lesson. And my second lesson is, from this almost 20 years of work, I see that research mainly focused on agriculture and water. But that's not the wrong thing. That's absolutely food security, agriculture, water security is much more important. But we often deprive the other sector, for example, health, fisheries, and livestock. And health is one of the most important area in not only in Bangladesh but in many countries. So this is the deprived lessons that I see. And the third lesson, that I find, often during the research and both implementation is the data gap, the authentic data gap, manipulated data in many cases. So which means, unfortunate is of course unfortunate, and this also, affect the transparency and accountability of the 7 principles of LLA. Correct. So this is again, it's not only in Bangladesh, but I would say in many countries in the world. And my fourth lessons that I see is the understanding on adaptation linkages is still poor among the local level government institute and also the local level NGOs. They know what to do to address the problems, but I find the difficulties that they can link properly, how their proposed actions will really address the impact and vulnerability of the climate change, and particularly in this implementation phase of my journey. So that needs to be linked. Otherwise, at some point you'll see people will be benefited, but people might get development benefit, but adaptation might be deprived. So that is my fourth lessons. And my fifth and last lessons is there's a huge requirement. If you look at the National Adaptation Plan, 2022, and they clearly mentioned that the country Bangladesh needs 8.5 billion per year, and they allocated in the last financial year is approximately 3 billion, 2.95 billion, which means 5 billion is a big gap. So to address the problems, you need 3 times of the current allocation. So finance gap for both research and implementation is my fifth lessons. Probably I will come back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Rabbani, for that excellent sharing. I'm now going to move to our final speaker, and thank you, Mukhlis, for your patience sitting through everybody else before I give you the floor. So Mukhlis Rahman heads an NGO in Bangladesh called the Center for Natural Resource Systems, CNRS, and he has a long history and experience of working at grassroots level, not just with local people, but with local ecosystems and connecting ecosystems with local communities and helping communities to conserve, preserve, and work with ecosystems. Nowadays, we use the phrase nature-based solutions, but he's been doing it before we even invented the phrase nature-based solutions. So, Mukhlis, tell us a little bit about your journey, particularly the grassroots experience that you have done and the lessons that you've learned from that.
Thank you, Salim Bhai. And also, I express my thanks to fellow panelists and respected audience. Let me start with myself. Actually, I studied biology, botany, zoology, and fisheries from Dhaka University. And then I spent first 10 years in aquaculture. I mean, doing fish culture in small ponds and repeating the same thing over years and years. And in end of 1991, I got the opportunity to work in the flood action plan. And that is the wider ecosystems, the past Howard ecosystems, Chalon Bills, and the Tangal floodplains. And I was involved in several studies. The one was more critical and important for my life or my career is the floodplain fisheries, sluice gates, and its impact on biodiversity and human nutrition. That actually, contributed a lot. And during that time, I learned some good things that in Cholonville area, in one floodplain, large floodplain, that was our monitoring site, one of the monitoring sites. And in that floodplain, there are hundreds of small ponds. Usually, people dig out ponds to store fish, and then they catch fish at the post-monsoon. But out of these hundreds, only 3 ponds not completely dried out for fishing. So we were a bit curious to know what happened, and we communicated with the local people. Actually, these 3 ponds are owned by the government. It's state-owned ponds, and it is leased out to, or it is managed by the local mosque committee. And they said that, we'd like to maintain the water level for people to drink water during hot summer when they work in the field, and also water for cattle, and also for fish to have the safe refuge. That we got the understanding of establishing sanctuaries. And when I worked in the same project in Tangal site, we had a fish migration program, and we set some fishing nets to see what sort of fish or larvae or eggs and juveniles coming in from river to floodplains. But that was a drought year. So water did not enter through that canal. So our monitoring, we had to abandon the monitoring. But fishers said, well, this year we'll have very, very less fish in the floodplains because pani nai, mas nai. So no water, no fish. We also had a site in Howrah area, which is a large wetland basin. And then people used to say, Jongle nai, mas nai, no forest, no fish. I said, how come? You relate to fish and jungle. They said this is a low-lying basin, and the swamp forests, when they go underwater and remain so for 6 months in a year, then lots of fish come and colonize that habitat. And it is very rich and support the fisheries. So we got the understanding that, well, we need to restore the swamp forest. If we can do that, then there would be more fish and biodiversity. In the coastal area, that's from the flood action program in my early career in the open water systems or the ecosystems work. Very recently, Salim Bhai is also involved in the G4CR project, which is a very small project. We excavated a canal to store rainwater for crop diversification in the dry season. But in the first year, people didn't do anything. I said, why you are not doing this? There's enough water in the canal. No, the water still has some kosh meaning salinity. We need at least 1 or 2 years monsoon flushing to clear out the salinity, and then we'll go for it. So we, the experts and practitioners or researchers, have a lot of things to learn from communities. So communities has strength actually to manage the ecosystems and biodiversity and the agricultural production systems. So our first initiative was in Tangal back in 1994. That was the ecosystem restoration. And we involved local communities in monitoring and also planning. And through their monitoring result, we actually reconnected the wetlands with the nearby Dholeshwari River. And we got 6 times higher the fish production and 36% increase in the fisheries biodiversity. That actually I think the cornerstone. And then Selim Bhai was involved. UNDP contact hired Selim Bhai, me, and others to design their projects under SAMP many years back. And they said, we want something like this, ecosystem restoration. And USAID also contacted me that we need a project like this. And March was there. Selim Bhai was also there in designing. And also WBRP, which is Wetland Biodiversity Rehabilitation Project in the Cholonbil area, because the area is embanked and lots of sluice gates. The fisheries is impacted, though some agricultural benefit is there. But there we actually demonstrated community-based sluice gate management. It is based on science and also the practice. When we monitored the fish in the fish fingerlings, or the very small, tiny spawn of carps in the river, and then we also see the agriculture farming system in the wetlands or beels, and we saw that if we just keep the gate open for a few days, there would be no problem for agriculture. So we just convinced the communities and they opened it up. And then we see changes in the biodiversity and production of natural fisheries. And then we also have programs with Hakaluki Howdy on DP and March project. We established community-based wetland sanctuaries in 2003, and still it is being managed by one CBO. So there are good experiences in ecosystem restorations. Yeah, Selim Bhai rightly said that we started in 1994, the ecosystem restoration. Now it is enveloped under NBS. Is fine. So Bangladesh is actually far ahead than many other countries, but we need to capitalize those, and documentation and communication is important where we have overall lackings, however. So the communities actually has strength. In Magura Noral site, in 30 years river, people historically use kind of barrier fencing, which is very harmful for fish to migrate and reach their breeding points. So through communities, we removed 57 such barriers, and then we see the changes. And the canals are occupied and grabbed and converted, but it is possible if the communities are engaged then to restore this. We did in many years back and also now. So I think, however, locally led adaptation has definitely lots of benefits and effectiveness, but we need to, what Rabbani said, that we need to critically follow the 8 principles, and we need to document, and then we need to communicate. In the Riverside project in Shamnagar, we restored the mangroves, and then in 4 or 5 years, then the crabs, shrimps, birds, they have started colonizing the habitats. And now it is very close to the communities. And women, I've seen that the women, they say 80% women collect shrimp peels, 80% women collect crabs, 80% women collect fuel. So they said it is our mini Sundarbans. So it is women's Sundarbans, because their barriers to go to Sundarbans, but they said it is our one. So yeah, so these are the experience that we have. Yeah, I'd like to stop here.
Thank you very much, Mukhlis. Apologies because we are running out of time. I wanted to do another round of asking each of you for a final thought, but I'm afraid we've run out of time. So I'll just conclude with a few remarks for our global audience to let you know that what we tried to do in this opening session of the 3rd Gobeshona Global Conference on Locally Led Adaptation and Resilience is to give you a flavor of the experience in Bangladesh. And this is just a small number of people. I could easily have invited 2 or 3 times as many people who have done similar amazing activities in Bangladesh. And this is something that we offer to global community in terms of sharing our lessons, sharing our experience, learning from the rest of the world. We're very keen to learn from anybody and everybody, but we are also very happy to share our experience. And one of the things that we are thinking of doing, and I'm now speaking on behalf of all the panelists here, and we'll follow up after the conference, is to enhance our ability as Bangladesh, as a country, the government and non-governmental actors and academics and researchers, all of us collectively, to host international visitors coming from other developing countries, particularly from least developed countries. I do quite a lot of that myself, and I can tell you it's extremely valuable. The best learning that we have found for locally led adaptation is what we call peer-to-peer, of people visiting and spending some time, not in a particularly structured course, that is also useful, but just spending some time with counterparts who are doing tackling a similar problem, a coastal zone problem, a mangrove restoration problem, a wetland problem. These things we can invite and host people from around the world, particularly from developing countries, going forward. And in my view, will be a very, very significant knowledge exchange. Documentation and videos are all very useful, but personal experience is by far the most valuable. And one of the things I want to take forward in the future, and I invite all of you to, join forces, all of us working together, is to host groups of people from other countries to come and spend some time in Bangladesh. They can pick the project or the work that they want to work with, and we can facilitate them to come and spend some time. And this is an extremely useful means of capacity building, of knowledge sharing, and developing social relationships with people from all over the world. So in my view, Bangladesh, as has been mentioned by several speakers already, is genuinely a laboratory for both tackling poverty alleviation as well as climate change and nature-based solutions at the same time. We haven't solved everything, but we are doing a lot of things that others can learn from, and we'd be very happy to share that going forward. And we hope one of the outcomes of the third Gobeshona conference will be a more systematic means of hosting people who wish to come to Bangladesh and learn from Bangladesh's experience. I'll stop there. Let me ask everybody who are still with us to turn your cameras on for one last screenshot and say goodbye to the audience. So goodbye, everybody, and thank you very much. And I look forward to having you join the other sessions of the conference, which are going to start now. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.